Today we celebrate the feast of Our Lady of Fatima. We know that back in 1917, Our Lady appeared to these three children and she had a message for them. Back in 1981, John Paul II on this day was shot, and it stirred up within him being saved, not just being shot, but being saved, that this was the finger of Our Lady directing the bullet. And we see in Our Lady's message several things, but one very important key part of the message is she says the daily rosary for peace, that we are to say a daily rosary for peace. And yet so many Catholics haven't figured out the importance of making sure we pray the rosary every day. It is so vitally important to pray a daily rosary for peace. Do you think I'm putting this too much? And yet we don't. Now, many of us, of course, come before this time, and we do pray the rosary together, thanks be to God. But so many they find it too long, too much, they can't do it, and it becomes a problem. Somebody sent me an article about doing the rosary in kind of a practical and good theological and all that stuff. And so I posted it yesterday on the Facebook site. A couple of things that I found powerful about this article. One is the rosary has the beauty of a fine work, and it talks about how the tangibleness of this prayer, that we're running this race course, going around the beads, around this circle, and it says, we finally get finished or accomplished. You may get distracted at times when going around that course, and yet your will was not distracted because you kept going. You may again be struggling with routine when you say it, but if you finish with St. Paul, you can say that you have completed the race. There are too many good intentions in the life of a Christian. A completed rosary is a good work, not something imagined or fecklessly wished for. I think that's beautiful because so often we think, well, I didn't pray that rosary well, I got distracted. Oh, that's okay. Do it anyway. Do it anyway. And one of my favorite quotes, which he ends with, is Chesterton's wise maxim that anything worth doing is worth doing badly. It's worth being done, even if we can't do it well. There's an act of the will, a choice. And as I said the other day, love is an act of the will. It's a choice. I will do this for your good. Not just a feeling or a thought or an emotion. So I encourage you, pray the rosary every day. It's so vitally important. I was reading a book that was a compilation of a number of books of Bishop Sheen, and he talks about the rosary and the importance of doing the rosary. He says, if you can't pray the rosary on your knees all in one time, and this is a paraphrase, he says that, okay, well, when you get up in the morning, do pray one decade of the rosary. And then as you're driving to work, pray a second decade of the rosary. And then over lunch, pray a third decade of the rosary. And then maybe after dinner, pray a fourth decade of the rosary. And then as you're going to bed at night, pray a fifth decade of the rosary. He says that's a good way to fall asleep, is to pray the rosary as you're doing this. And he says if you're young, in your 20s, you can probably get a decade in, maybe a decade and a half. If you're in your 40s, you can probably get about 3 or 4 decades in. And if you're his age, he says, then you can probably get 10, 12, 15 decades in before you fall asleep. But just another way of trying to offer to Our Lady this rosary, this daily rosary for peace. Another piece of the Fatima message is reparation. We see this in the first Saturday devotions, which came about after Our Lady coming to Lucia and saying afterwards to pray on the first Saturdays, to confession, communion, and then 15 minutes of prayer, meditating on the mysteries of the Rosary with the intention of reparation to Our Lady's Immaculate Heart. Making repair. What is this? It's all about love. And our hearts are so often so distant from God. And it's this opportunity to repair by our love the wounds of Our Lady's heart for the lack of love, the indifference in the world. And then finally, one final piece I want to talk about is sacrifice. And of course, sacrum facere means to make holy. That we make holy those things of our day. We offer them to God. We sacrifice to them. Sometimes it doesn't mean a denial of ourselves, but it doesn't necessarily mean a denial. It means taking what we have, the daily duties, the daily sufferings that we all have. Because there's no one that doesn't have some sort of suffering in our lives. But taking it and offering it to God, making it holy for souls to be saved. And sometimes it does mean that we're going to be struggling and having greater pain and suffering than others. But as we heard in the gospel today, Jesus says that the Father does take away every branch in me that does not bear fruit, and every one that does bear fruit, He prunes so that it will bear more fruit. And sometimes we have to allow ourselves to be pruned by saying, okay, here God, I'm giving this to you. And we may look and say, well, this suffering is overwhelming, this is too much, and yet it's all done in love. Everything comes through the hands of Our Lady to us. Out of love. And if it seems like it's too much, it's because we're being pruned, and we say, okay, this is good, and I'm going to offer it to you, O God. Here, take. For salvation, for my poor, wicked soul that needs to be converted, for the souls of those in the world, especially those in most need of your mercy, those who are falling into hell. Lord, bring new life. And so we get to offer sacrifice. My God, I believe, I adore, I hope, and I love you. I beg pardon for those who do not believe, do not adore, do not hope, and do not love you. Let us turn to Our Lady today, on this her feast day, asking her to help us to make good sacrifice of everything in our lives, not being afraid of being pruned, that we may make reparation to her heart, and for the courage to be able to pray that daily rosary, that act of the will of love for God and for Our Lady, for peace. Peace in our world, peace in our heart.